Hello there, and I'm back at the desk, and that's because I don't want to do a review right now. I actually want to just have a general discussion. And the topic of the discussion that I'd like to have is regarding the 2020 miniseries of The Stand. We're 5 episodes in of the planned 9 episodes that are going to be released, and I have some thoughts that I really needed to start sharing toot sweet. So that's what this is going to be here. And to kind of give a little bit of my backstory, I've read a lot of Stephen King, but this is actually one book that I've never tackled. However, I was a big fan of the original miniseries from 1994. I remember watching it on TV, each of the 4 parts over the course of a month, one per week. And I was a really big fan of it. It aired on ABC, and it was a fantastic thing, especially for its time. And when I heard that the new miniseries was going to be coming out, I went ahead and gave it another rewatch, just to kind of refresh my memory and so forth. And what I will say is, although it holds up on a storyline level, it didn't age terribly well. And I have to fully admit that, especially when we get into some of the CGI cheesiness. And also bearing in mind that it was airing on a family broadcast channel during the 90s, when it really couldn't go as far as it possibly could in terms of scares and gore and so on and so forth. And considering the adult nature of this material, it did feel like it was holding back a lot. And so all of those things had me really excited for the prospect of a new miniseries. Not only was it going to be 9 hours instead of 6, but we were also going to be airing it on a streaming service, which allowed a lot more leeway and freedom in terms of adult material. Not that I necessarily wanted a full-blown gore fest, but at the very least, it was able to tackle the themes and the details of the story in a way that didn't have to hold back. If it chose to, then fine, but it didn't have to. And so far, 5 episodes in, I have to say that this has been a pretty terrible disappointment for me. And I'm going to get into why, but I did want to provide a little bit of the backstory there, that I haven't read the book, so I'm coming at this from the knowledge of the original miniseries only, as well as some synopses that I've read here and there and so forth about some characters. But getting into this now, I think really the major issue I have, and I'll support this with some details, but the major issue I have with the current miniseries as it stands right now is its complete underutilization of contrasting elements. And that was a huge portion of the original miniseries. This knew that it had 2 diametrically opposed sides, and it knew how to utilize them properly in its storytelling devices. It was basically good versus evil, Boulder, Colorado versus Las Vegas, Mother Abigail versus Randall Flagg. It was just completely 2 separate things, and that's the way it started. I mean, it started out with everybody dying, for the most part, of Captain Trips, and them finding their way, getting dreams from both sides, and then their personality and their ethics and so forth, letting them guide them to either go to Colorado or Las Vegas. And each of those characters and their personal morality in their guidance of where they're going to go was shown through not only the color palette, but the music. Everything about it was either this side or this side. And it played those 2 sides very well against each other in terms of emotional response. And yes, perhaps in a way that was a little bit hammy, but a little bit, white hat cowboy versus black hat cowboy villain and so forth. But even so, I think that the nature of the story and the nature of the times that it was kind of representing, it lent itself for that level of divide, that level of unambiguousness. And yeah, reality is ambiguous. There's really nobody that's ever really all good, and there's nobody that's ever really all bad. There's gray areas. We all exist in a spectrum of gray areas in terms of our morality, our character, and so on and so forth. But even so, this did have a very clear, definitive dividing line between the 2. And when we are shown the characters that did go to the free zone in Colorado and so forth, we're shown happiness. We're shown bright colors and sunshiny. Yes, they went through hell. They went through hell to get there. They went through their own trials and tribulations and so forth, but they all led there. And these are people that are good at their heart of it. Smiles abound. And we can tell that they legitimately enjoy each other's company. They are happy people that are happy being together. And then on the other side, we have the Lloyds and the trash can mans and so forth that are unhappy folks, or at the very least think they're happy in their selfish and superficial lifestyles. and the promises that are made to them by Randall Flagg. And I'll get into the Randall Flagg thing in just a little bit here, but my point is that the two sides were clearly delineated from each other in all sorts of different ways, both the character performances, the character traits, the filming style, the lighting style, the music that was continually ramping up and down and so forth. Every single one of them had their moments. And in this, the new miniseries, 5 episodes in, and everybody just kind of seems dour. The muted color palette doesn't do it any favors. Everybody's in the free zone right now, and I'm wondering, what's the point? What are they really going for there? Are they really happy? Because it doesn't really seem like it. Everybody's kind of going through their own issues and their own little personal hell, and they've brought that hell with them to the Colorado area. Nobody seems really relieved to be there. Nobody seems to be really happy in each other's company, at the very least, in some scenes perhaps. But for the most part, that air of jubilance and that air of we are good people trying to exist and rebuild things to be better than it was before, it doesn't seem to really be there. And I think that there's no better evidence of that than the 2 different Mother Abigail performances. I enjoy Whoopi Goldberg and I enjoy her performance in this, but I just think it's the wrong tone. That's not a critical of her acting. It's a critical element of the writing and the directing and so forth. But in the original miniseries, Mother Abigail was a guiding light. She was a pleasure. She made people smile when she was getting into their dreams in the cornfields and so forth, guiding them to Colorado. It was a source of, we're walking amongst dead bodies and we're in some sort of special level of hell trying to get out of New York. But when we go to sleep, we can dream of Mother Abigail and her guitar and her soft voice and her smile and get to Colorado because that's where we want to be. We want to be resting in the lap of her warmth and her comfort. And I just have to ask, where the fuck is that in this new one? It doesn't really seem to be anywhere to be found. She's, speaking on behalf of God. She's, not necessarily being cold, but at the very least, definitely more standoffish, especially once they get to the free zone. I don't know how this was in the book, but all I can say is this notion of only talking to people through Nick doesn't really work in terms of the visual narrative that the story is trying to bring forward on screen. Whether it works in the book, whether it's accurate to the book or not, which probably it is, I just don't think that it works that well on screen. It really makes her seem off-putting, cold, and what is the point of us going here to follow this woman we aren't even allowed to see?
I love you, but there's nothing to discuss. I told you. If you had anything you wanted to say to me, you were to say it to Nick. You were to act like Nick was speaking for me, and you take care of it. Let me go, little girl.
Okay, but that leaves him directly responsible for the...
What?
And then when she does show up, it's basically to just admonish folks. You're not doing what I told you. You're fucking it all up. What the hell is going on here? If you want to talk to me, you can talk to Nick. I told you that. Why are you talking to me personally? And then back into her little cave. So there's the warmth is gone. The muted color palette brings no warmth there. The soundtrack isn't bringing the level of warmth that the original certainly did. I mean, listen to this just pleasant riff that kind of goes on here as people are trying to get to the free zone and they're in there and so forth. It's just overall very pleasant, very guiding together and banding together, and we're going to make this work. It's optimistic, it's warm, and that is not present in this one. The warmth is gone, and without that, the line blurs between the two sides and the diametrical opposition breaks apart. The contrasting elements aren't there. And likewise, when we're talking about the Randall Flagg character, again, I don't know how he was in the book, but I think that Jamie Sheridan's performance of him was remarkably good. I thought that level of happiness that he really provided, at least on a surface level, that level of dripping with charisma, tell them anything they want to hear with a wink and a smile, but by the way, you might have to owe me something down the road. Just making jokes and making light of things and really being $1 million guy. I thought that was the perfect way to portray somebody that really had his other hand doing nefarious things while he's showing them the happy, side of things. Tricking everybody basically, so that, even the people that when they realize that he's not who he says he was, that he doesn't have the intentions that he claimed he did, by that time it's too late. You're already dug in, you've already bought the lie, you've already sold your soul, and accept the ride because now there's no getting out. And the performance of Alexander Skarsgård is not a bad one, but again, just like Whoopi Goldberg, even though I enjoy the performance on an acting level, I wonder what the hell is going on with the tone of it, because the level of enthusiasm and personality just seems to be dialed down to a mute, dull 2 or 3. Everything is just kind of dour and, traditionally evil and so on and so forth, which it really just doesn't really fit the character as well as I know him from the original miniseries. Eventually, yes, I will pick up the book and read it, I promise. But the miniseries originally in 1994 worked for me, and these are the elements of why, and these are the elements that are missing out of this new one. And another thing that really isn't working for this is the fractured timeline storytelling device. This is a very tricky thing to pull off. Mike Flanagan's been a really master at it in terms of, The Haunting of Hill House, The Haunting of Bly Manor, and so forth. Well, the non-linear storytelling where you have the one central path, and then as people latch onto those characters and so forth, it seems like the reason we latch onto them is because their personalities are just baked in. And they don't seem like blank slates. Not from the first minute they're on the screen. They are fully functional, well-developed, well-rounded people that are going through their own things with their own personalities. And then we backstep and get the stories of how they came to be there. What in their lives led them to that moment. What made them who they are. And it's a storytelling device that really is tricky. Not only in terms of figuring out how to balance everything in terms of storytelling here while we're also developing the backstory here. How much of it do we reveal here before we reveal here? But also not breaking the tempo of the show or film. To go backwards, you're really risking turning the audience off because we may be incredibly invested in this particular moment right here, and then all of a sudden, backwards. And the tempo is broken, and it's like, God, can we please just get back here? So it's a really tricky thing to pull off, and I gotta be honest, I don't think this is doing that well. As an example of that, we just got in episode 4 the scene with Tom Cullen being, well, not hypnotized in this case, but given his instructions for becoming a spy to go to Las Vegas. And in the original miniseries, that was fucking devastating. That was heartbreaking to the nth degree, watching them hypnotize Tom Cullen and having him repeat back how they kicked him out of the free zone because they didn't want him to have idiot children if he wound up with the wife and so on. And if, watching him flinch as they get the instructions of if you're followed and it's multiple people, run, but if it's only one person, then kill them. Watching this person that we have had this emotional connection with, this gentle giant that we have fallen in love with, be given the instructions that will likely send him to his death, that they are going to send him alone, out in the cold, to fend for himself against all odds and bring information back if he can survive. It's very much sending the sheep out to live amongst the wolves, and it's heartbreaking, it's devastating. We know him as a character that has been best friends with Nick and just shines through with jubilance and light and so forth, and improves Nick's life as well, who's also portrayed as a happy person. I don't want to get too far off. I'm going to get back to Nick, but again, the level of happy together really shines through in the original, and in this one, it's not that I don't enjoy the Tom Cullen character and his performance by Brad William Henke, but do I have a connection with him? No, because he hasn't been given any real screen time. We got introduced to him when Nick was coming out of the hospital, and it was a scene that lasted maybe 5 or 10 minutes, and that's pretty much all we've had so far. It did provide a little bit in the episode where he was being given his instructions and so forth, but by that time we were still getting to know him. We didn't know him yet. We hadn't developed the connection because the timeline's all the fuck over the place. That's an example of how this storytelling, when not done well, serves to detract from the story instead of improve upon it. If we don't have a foundational emotional connection to the characters, then what they wind up going through doesn't have an impact on us. And that's one thing that Mike Flanagan has been extremely careful about in his series, is if a character is having to go through a gauntlet, through something that is going to be an emotional wreck, he makes sure that we have, by that point, the foundational elements of both the foreground story and their backstory to know them as a fully fleshed out character before that moment. But until that moment, That's when we get the two sides of things. That's when the nonlinear storytelling really comes into play, is bringing that character to life, to focus. We know them and enjoy them on the foreground level, but then we get the backstory and we get them fully fleshed out. And now that we know them fully, time to run them through the gauntlet, and that just hits so hard. This hasn't done that. It hasn't done the legwork. It's just all over the place. I just don't understand the tone that it's putting out there and how it's expecting us to have any emotional connection with the characters of the story. Henry Zaga playing Nick, I don't have any real problem with his performance. Again, everybody's acting reasonably well. It's just what's being expected of them and being asked of them doesn't fit The Stand. It doesn't fit the people that are happy together in the free zone. Nick just kind of seems to be there. Again, dour. Doesn't seem to be happy about fucking anything. Ever. And he's clearly not that comfortable being a middle person between the rest of the town and everybody else and Mother Abigail. So, I mean, this whole thing just kind of has everybody kind of... And that just seems like the wrong tone for anybody in the free zone, the people that were good of heart and good of soul enough to be worthy and to desire a life amongst the light, as opposed to the darkness. So between the muted tones of the characters preventing us from having any sort of emotional connection with the storyline, and the fractured storytelling that's preventing us from having any emotional connection to the characters themselves, this so far has just kind of seemed pretty blah. It's been bland. It's been something that I've been watching more out of obligation than out of enjoyment anymore. It's more like, well, I'm several episodes in and I still like the original. Maybe it'll turn around and I'll just keep going with it. But I got to tell you, it's not something that I look forward to every week like I did in 1994. And I just think that that's a damn shame because they had a really interesting opportunity here. But who knows? They have 4 episodes left. That's almost half the time. Maybe this is something they can turn around. We'll find out. But I really have a feeling what's going to wind up happening is the same thing that happened with the Tom Cullen giving his instruction scene, is all the scenes that are coming up in terms of having any kind of emotional impact and that punch to the gut, especially when we're talking about them taking their stand and going on that first step of that journey, the 4 characters that are going to go on the road together. That is a very impactful moment, and I have a feeling what's going to happen is it's just going to happen, and I'm not going to feel anything when it does, and that's just going to be a damn shame. But I'm keeping my brain open, I'm keeping my mind open, I'm keeping my heart open. We will continue seeing, but so far, 5 episodes in, I really just had to get my thoughts out, and I'm curious what you think. If you agree with me, if you disagree with me, I'd love to have a conversation in the comments. But yeah, I think that should about do it for today, so thank you again, and look for me tomorrow. I'll be coming up with a traditional movie review for you then. Talk to you soon.